Today's edition of Mac Voices is supported by MacVoices Magazine, our free Flipboard magazine that brings you some of the best Mac, iPhone, and iPad productivity tips on the web. High in signal, low in noise, just like Mac Voices, MacVoices Magazine includes information on how you can get more out of your Apple technology. Subscribe at macvoices.com/magazine or search for MacVoices Magazine on Flipboard. And by the Mac Voices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter to stay up to date on all the Mac Voices news. Subscribe from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Welcome back to Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we're all about to embark on one of the most precarious things in our everyday lives, and that is the upgrading of the Mac OS, because we all use our machines for entertainment, for productivity, for fun, for work, for play, for whatever. And upgrading to a new version can be really easy or really not easy. And there's one guy that I trust to guide me through this process so I won't have any problems, and that is, wait for it, Mr. Joe Kissell. Joe, it's great to have you back.
I was ready for you to say Dan Frakes, or but that's okay. I'll accept that as well.
You'll accept the mantle.
Yeah,
good.
Nice to be here as always.
So your new book is Take Control of Upgrading to Sierra.
Yes, and it's like it's as though there's an echo in here. Yeah. I mean, we've only done this how many times?
Yeah, you're Take Control of Upgrading to whatever is not new, but each time, there are different experiences from the last one to the new one. And at the very least, I think it's a good thing to remind folks that, maybe you just don't want to hit that upgrade button without taking a few precautions.
Yeah, this is actually the 10th one of these.
Wow.
Going back to Panther 10.3 in 2013. 2003. That's how time flies. So yeah, this is as you say, it is upgrading your Mac OS is a good time for reflection. It's like, when you have a significant birthday, this is a good time to say, well, I'm just going to take a moment and think about my life. And when you have your annual medical checkup or whatever it is, there are certain moments when you think, this is just a good time for a little bit of introspection and self-reflection. And when it comes time to update your Mac to a new version of Mac operating system, it's a good time to just reflect on technology and think, okay, now what kinds of bad things have I done in the last year that might mess this up? What kinds of goofy software might I have installed? How recently have I backed up my Mac? Am I really sure I'm not going to get myself into trouble? That sort of stuff. So yeah, it's a good time to just stop and think.
Okay, so what should we be stopping and thinking about?
Well, first, I have to say the Sierra installer is very, very much like the El Capitan installer and like the Yosemite installer and like the Mavericks installer. And if you've done this a few times, it's going to look really familiar. And as I say, like if you have good backups, if you have you keep your stuff well organized, well ordered, you keep all your software up to date. You've done this a couple of times before. Honestly, you really don't need to buy my book. If you are nervous about upgrading for any reason, then you should buy the book, however many times you've done it. What's different this time is, we'll talk about what's different in Sierra first, and then we'll talk about what's different in my book. If anything, the installer has gotten smarter and better and more intelligent. And so the process for the vast majority of people is going to be, you go to the App Store, you click the download button, you wait for it to download, the installer runs, and you're done. So that can be the experience. It often will be the experience. There are, of course, some gotchas there, which we'll talk about, but that is the rough outline. There is one thing, though, in particular, that the Sierra installer offers to do that I especially counsel pausing and reflecting on before accepting the default choice. So there's a screen in the installer that says all your files in iCloud, and what it wants, and there's a checkbox, just one checkbox, and it's checked. And if you do nothing but click the continue button, then what's going to happen is that the installer is going to move your desktop folder into iCloud Drive, and it's going to move your documents folder into iCloud Drive. In the process of doing that, if it turns out that your desktop and documents folder contain more data than the amount that you're paying Apple for iCloud storage, Apple will invite you to pay them more money per month to accommodate that. And the sales pitch is basically a couple of things. Hey, if you put all the stuff that's in your desktop and documents folders in iCloud Drive, it'll sync to your other Macs. Oh, and also all those documents will be available on your iOS device and on the iCloud.com website. So instead of having different, versions of your stuff everywhere, you have the same thing everywhere. Isn't that great? Isn't that handy? That's part of the sales pitch. And the other part of the sales pitch is, and if you start running out of space on your Mac, we'll take some of those files that are safely stored in iCloud Drive and we'll just delete the local copies so that you now have enough space on your disk. And then if you need them, the icon's still there. You can still double click them. And then as soon as you try to open it, it'll download from iCloud Drive. And so it's a matter of syncing, which is great, and redundancy, and also saving space. So what's not to like, right? And so, of course, most people are going to leave that checkbox checked. And that's the checkbox I'm going to say, stay far away from this. Now, it's actually a good choice for some people. And I don't want you to think that it's something that nobody should ever use. I don't use it. I will probably never use it. And I just want to share why it's something to stop and think about. So the first thing is there is money involved. If you have tens, hundreds of gigabytes of stuff in your documents folder on your desktop, you might have to pay Apple tens of dollars per year or per month for the extra storage. So there's that. There's privacy. So Apple encrypts your stuff, but Apple also holds the encryption key. So Apple's encryption might keep your documents very safe from random hackers, but they're not going to keep your stuff safe from the government or law enforcement, courts. They're absolutely Apple is absolutely able to provide your data if you store it in iCloud Drive. So there's the privacy aspect. There's the what if something goes wrong aspect? What if Apple has an outage at just the moment that you need a file that is only stored in iCloud Drive? What if something goes kerflooey on Apple's servers and a document disappears? Well, you better hope you have a local backup, because there's no interface for well, maybe Apple backs up the files too, but there's no way to know or no way to get those files back. And if you have, let's say you have a couple of Macs, you have a desktop Mac with a lot of storage, and then you have a MacBook Air, something with a very small amount of storage, you have different things on those two Macs because, of course, they don't, one doesn't have enough space for all the same files that are in the other. Sometimes we have very good reasons for not having our desktop and documents folders be in sync on multiple Macs. So yeah, it's true that on the smaller capacity Mac, Apple just stores stuff in iCloud Drive and not have local copies, but you don't get to decide which documents it stores locally. That's up to iCloud to make that decision. And I'm not sure that it'll always make the right decision. So it's really a little bit scary to think that I might be stuck someplace, I'm on a plane, or I'm someplace without internet access, or there's an internet outage or an outage on Apple's servers, and I can't get at the stuff I need because I took advantage of this really helpful feature. So what I say is, don't check that box. Uncheck the box. You can think about it later and decide if you want to use it. And in an update to my iCloud book, which we'll talk about in another interview, I talk about this feature in elaborate detail and who should use it and who shouldn't use it and what you might want to do instead if you want to have the same end result. But basically, I'm saying don't check the box until you've had a chance to really think through the implications. And if you decide you want it, you can turn it on afterwards.
Okay, that was the first question. So it's not a one choice, or you can never reverse it. So that's good.
Right.
Joe, the idea that I forget what they call it now. You probably know, but
optimized storage.
Optimized storage. Yeah. That scares me a little bit. You brought up the encryption part, and the outage part. I just bring up I'm sorry to say it, but the reliability of Apple's iCloud has not been exactly 100%.
You are correct about that.
So,
and I could go on there. Optimized storage is actually the name for sort of a collection of features. So the storing your documents in desktop in iCloud Drive is an aspect of it. And the, deleting older files to make space on your disk is an aspect of it. There are a few other things. There's like macOS Sierra can automatically remove items from your trash that have been there for 30 days or longer. There are other apps that do this too, like Hazel, but now macOS can do that too if you like. That's to save space. There's also a setting to store all of the movies and TV shows that you've purchased from iTunes and you've watched already. macOS can just delete those, but with the idea that, well, you've already watched them, so you probably don't need local copies, but you can download them again from the cloud. Except sometimes things disappear from the iTunes store, and then you can't download them again, even though you bought them. And that's why I keep local copies of everything I purchase from iTunes. So there are a couple of other things too. So I think Apple is well-intentioned. They are trying to solve real problems, and they are acknowledging the fact that, well, yeah, you have a lot of stuff. You don't have a lot of storage on your devices, but you probably do have really fast internet access, and you probably don't care very often about these old files. So let's just, help you out. So I don't think I don't think it's a bad idea. I don't think it's a malicious idea. And I think for your average user, it's probably fine. But I am not an average user, and of course, the MacVoices audience is not composed of average users. We are all above average, I think. Way above average. Above average. And as you say, iCloud has had a couple of reliability glitches. So I think, great idea. Don't jump into it without some reflection.
Okay. I know you've been running Sierra now for a while.
Yeah.
How about the inevitable compatibility question? Do we have any major glitches in compatibility that you know of at the moment? Recognizing that you can't test every single program out there, but the common ones, some of the major ones?
Yeah, one of the things that happens every single time macOS is updated is a lot of mail plugins stop working. I have either new or beta versions of the ones that are most important to me, so that's fine. And I'm used to this. I figure in a week to a month, the rest of them will be updated, and I'll install them, and it'll be fine. There are a couple of older apps I've noticed have the slash through them, sorry, this won't run in Sierra. But it was really no more than a curiosity to me because they're apps I haven't used in forever and don't particularly care about. But all the stuff that I rely on every day for actual productivity has been fine. If anything, the number of the apps that I've found to be incompatible has been smaller than with older versions of OS 10. You will have, there are some things, one of the things I talk about in the book always is update all your software if you can before updating to Sierra, because the installer will look for certain incompatibilities that it knows about and disable things. And if it doesn't catch everything, you could restart under Sierra and find out that there's, crashing or some kind of bug, which you could avoid if you had just installed the latest version beforehand. So there's a class of utilities like AirParrot and Duet and shoot, there's one or two others that I'm forgetting, but basically ways of using an iOS device like an iPad as a second screen for your Mac, and those all need to be updated or they won't work under Sierra. As far as I know, there are actually new versions available for these things, but if you have just like a fairly recent version, but not the brand newest one, those will be disabled by the installer. A few other things like that, like older versions of, I think, Parallels Access, and I'm kind of drawing a blank, but there are a few things like that. But this reminds me of something else. There is a thing missing in Sierra. Well, there are a few things. And Sierra gives, it takes away. There are some things that were brought back, which is nice. But there's a security feature that you may be familiar in the last couple of versions of macOS. You could say, go into System Preferences and say, run only applications downloaded from the Mac App Store, or run applications downloaded from the Mac App Store and those with an app sign with a valid Apple developer ID, or choice 3, run anything regardless of where I downloaded it from. And that choice 3 was always a very dangerous thing because that sort of opens the gateway for all kinds of malware. Choice 3 is gone now. You can't choose that. Your only options are just the Mac App Store or Mac App Store plus, signed apps from legitimate Apple developers. Now, having said that, there is still possible to decide for any one individual app that comes from another source, yes, I want to run this. But what you can no longer do is set a global system-wide preference that, just run anything without even alerting me. That's gone, and that's a really good thing, I think. It's good for security. It's good to keep malware off of your Mac, but it is going to cause a certain amount of consternation from a certain amount of people who, are used to having that flexibility.
Yeah, and that's, like you say, even now, before Sierra, I don't know too many people that had that set, unless they really knew what they were doing. So, and I would hope that this doesn't affect a lot of people. And for those people that it does, well, sorry, but, that it helps protect the people that aren't quite as savvy as you are.
Yeah, well, I do know what I'm doing, and I still didn't use that feature. Yeah. So you got to draw the line somewhere. And they're just, malware developers are way too smart and way too sneaky, and I don't want to give them any help. So.
Amen. Yeah. Joe, to drag us back to something a little more basic, because I think we have this conversation every time, but I'm going to ask it again under these circumstances. How do you feel about upgrading InPlace versus the inevitable, Nuke and Pave and reinstall, or doing a backup, installing clean, and then migrating your information over?
That's a good question. So you've described the three possible upgrade paths, and most people will just run the installer, let it upgrade in place, and you're done. And then what I call Plan B is sort of you start up from another drive. It could be like one of these. You've created a bootable installer on a USB flash drive, or it could be a bootable duplicate you've put on a hard drive or whatever. You start up from that, you run disk utility, you erase your internal disk, and then you run the Sierra installer. And at the end of the installer, the equivalent of Migration Assistant pops up and says, hey, do you want to transfer your old data? And you connect your backup because, of course, you made a backup. And you let it copy over whatever stuff you need. And then the third, as you say, is Nuke and Pave. And I have about a page about Nuke and Pave in my book, and that's basically you erase the disk. You install a fresh, clean copy of OS X. You don't let it migrate anything. You manually reinstall your apps, reset your preferences, re-enter your license codes, and recopy just the documents and other stuff you want from a backup or from wherever. In the past, it has... I want to say this carefully. So normally what I say is this: do the upgrade in place. It's the easiest, it's the fastest, and for most people in most situations, that's all you'll need. But you've already made a complete clone of your disk before you upgrade. So if you do the in-place upgrade and you realize that there are problems, then it's super easy to revert to plan B. All right, I still have my backup, so I'm going to erase the new thing. I will do the clean installation followed by the migration of my old stuff. And really only if that fails should you consider the Nuke and Pave option, because it takes such a long time and it's so irritating. And when I've done this in the past, months later, I'm still finding things that I forgot about. It's like, oh, yeah, I authorized the old thing to do something and I didn't unauthorize it. And now I got to jump through. Oh, there was some little command line utility that I installed that other things depend on that I forgot. There's just like all these little, fiddly bits. So I really hate Nuke and Pave and try to avoid it if at all possible. But I have to say, this is the first time I was tempted to do it. And that has nothing to do with Sierra. It has nothing to do with El Capitan. It really only has to do with the fact that I have permitted my Mac to get more junked up than usual. I've been writing about a lot of stuff and installing a lot of beta software, and I keep noticing these just anomalies, and I could track them down. I could figure out exactly which thing that I installed, 2 years ago is causing the problem. But there comes a point at which you just feel safer starting over from scratch. I will say what I actually did on my two main Macs was an in-place upgrade. But I will also say that I was seriously tempted to do Nuke and Pave, and I know Josh Centers did, and Tanya Angst did on at least one of her computers. So the option still exists if I later decide I want to do that.
This may be off topic and maybe on topic, but one thing I try to do before I do an upgrade is I go back and I sort of audit all my applications. And if there's stuff on there that I don't need, I try to delete it. Number one, it frees up some room. Number two, it should get rid of some of the cruft sort of as a housekeeping thing.
Yes.
But I'm curious to see if you have a preferred app deletion program, because if you just delete the app, of course, preference panes and all the other ancillary stuff that's stored in your library folders can still be there. Now, yeah. I prefer app delete. That's the one that I've had the best luck with. Do you have something better or something else?
My personal preference is CleanMyMac by MacPaw. I've tried a bunch of different ones. In fact, several years, it's outdated now, but 4 or 5 years ago, I wrote an article for Macworld comparing a bunch of app deletion utilities. And what I discovered in writing that article is that they're all safe to use. They're not going to delete things that they shouldn't, but some of them don't delete as many of the things that they should as you would like. And there are, ease of use things and so forth. So I have not used app delete really recently. I have a few, like, Hazel can uninstall apps when you drag them to the trash. Sometimes I let it do that. More often I use CleanMyMac because it gives me a lot more insight and control. So when you go to uninstall an app with CleanMyMac, it's like, okay, now if I were to do this, here are the files that will go. And if you disagree with any of these, you can uncheck them. So I'm not just going to do it blindly. I'm going to let you see what would happen, and I will only do it if you give me the thumbs up and let all those checkboxes stay checked. So I like that because sometimes, like, I've installed a newer version, or there's an app changes its name, or something happens where I know that I need some of those old support files, even though the uninstaller thinks that I don't. So, and CleanMyMac can also do other sorts of housekeeping, tidying up things. So that's what I like. But I mentioned app delete and half a dozen or so others in the book, and I say, if you're going to uninstall apps, which is a smart thing to do if you're not using them, if the developer provides their own uninstaller, then great, use that. But if not, you don't want to just drag the app to the trash, because, as you say, it could still be leaving many gigabytes of other stuff scattered hither and yon, and you really want to get rid of that crap.
Amen. Do we even need to say backup? I know you've said it a couple times, sort of in passing, but 2 backups,
Well,
3 backups? How paranoid are you?
You know, backup. Yeah,
Oh.
you have to have backups. I mean, so I have a friend who is an Apple genius, works at Geniusbar at an Apple store, and he was telling me the other day stuff I have heard many times before. You would be shocked and appalled at how few Mac users who come in here have any kind of backups at all. And he wants to make, like, when he wants to make people sign a piece of paper when you buy a new Mac, promising you will back up. Like, obviously it wouldn't be like legally binding, but that's what he thinks. That's what he thinks that Apple should do. You just to raise awareness, just to put that in your head, like, oh yes, this is actually my responsibility and not Apple's responsibility. So yeah, you really need to have a backup. You really need to update that backup right before you install Sierra. There are people who use Time Machine, and that is better than nothing. Although I think Time Machine is sort of a second-tier choice when it comes to pre-upgrade backups, partly because it's really easy to exclude things like, oh, well, I have these really big files, virtual machines in VMware Fusion or Parallels or GarageBand files or whatever, that they're so big, I don't really want to include them in my backup. So you exclude them. Then later on, you're migrating from your Time Machine backup. You forget about this, and those files are totally gone. They're not on your new Mac, and they're not in your backup either. So I hate for people to get in situations like that. So any backup, including Time Machine, where you've excluded stuff, not the best kind for this particular application. Plus, having migrated from a lot of different kinds of backups, I've found the Time Machine is often a lot more time-consuming to restore from. So I advocate using a bootable duplicate. You use something like Carbon Copy Cloner or SuperDuper or any of numerous other apps that will make a complete copy of everything on your disk, put it on another disk, and that's your backup. And I mean, yes, also use CrashPlan, also use Time Machine. That's all fine. Those serve really great purposes too. But for this moment, for doing the upgrade, you really want to have a clone. And what that allows you to do is, if anything goes wrong during the upgrade process or afterwards, you can just take that clone and clone it back onto your disk, and you're exactly where you started from before. So that's really what I recommend.
And my personal beating of the drum is, please, folks, when we say backups, don't just say, oh, everything's in my documents folder and drag it over, because you can spend weeks, just like Joe said earlier, reinstalling and remembering what all those little programs were to reinstall. For me, it's almost as much about keep maintaining my production environment as it is about maintaining my documents. Because my documents probably are stored in Time Machine or on the online backup service or whatever. They are arguably easier to get back than my production environment. So please, please, please.
Yeah, well, you have your production environment. I also have a production environment here for ebooks. And I store a lot of stuff in Dropbox, and I store some things in iCloud Drive, and I do have online backups and various other ways. And so if I bought a new Mac and I just said, I'm going to start with a clean slate, I'm not going to restore any of that stuff, all I'm going to do is turn on iCloud Drive and install Dropbox, then honestly, I don't know the percentage, but a very large percentage of my documents would just magically appear, and I wouldn't even have to think about them. But it's that, whatever it is, the 10% or the 5% or whatever that small number is of things that didn't go in one of those places for some important reason, due to size or privacy, or because it some settings file for an app. But all those little things turn out to be surprisingly important, and my workflow for writing and for producing ebooks involves lots of little tools and scripts and stuff that, like, all the little pieces have to be in exactly the right place and they have to be updated to the right version. And it's just maddening to try to reproduce that.
Yeah, and time consuming, not just maddening.
but having said that, I mean, I have to also say there are a lot of Mac users who use, text edit, Mail, and Safari, and very little else. You can do a lot of things in a web browser. You can do all of your word processing, spreadsheets, image editing, almost anything in a web browser. And there are those people who use their Macs that way. So if that's you, hey, that's great. You have much less to worry about in terms of backups and migration and so forth. But the more you have customized things, the more urgent it becomes.
So after all that, Joe, I think you gave us one or two major potential gotchas if you're not careful. Anything else from the book that we need to pay special attention to this time around?
Well, there's one thing. When Apple started distributing updates to macOS or OS 10 or macOS 10 via the App Store, the first one you get was Lion. That was 10.7, and you had to update to 10.6.8 before you could do that. And then from there on, it was always the case that as long as you had at least Snow Leopard 10.6.8 installed, you could then download the newest version of macOS from the App Store and install it. That's changed this time. So not only are some older Macs no longer supported by Sierra, but also your Mac has to be running at least 10.7.5 in order to even be able to download and install Sierra. So if you are still running Snow Leopard and you want to update to Sierra, you have to install El Capitan first. And the reason you have to install El Capitan and not just Lion or Mountain Lion or whatever is that, those intermediate operating systems are no longer available for download from the Mac App Store. So if you have 10.6 and you want to get to 10.12, you have to first install 10.11, go through that whole upgrade process, and then go back while running 10.11 and install Sierra. But what if you're running 10.5 Leopard? There are some machines that can run Sierra that also can run Leopard. I hope there's very few people like that. But if you're upgrading from Leopard to Sierra, then you have to first buy a copy of Snow Leopard from Apple on like a disk. Crazy, right? Install that. Then you have to update to El Capitan, and then you have to update to Sierra. So it is becoming. It's not just that some older Macs are not supported anymore. It's becoming harder for people who have not kept up with at least some of the system upgrades to upgrade all the way to the newest. So and again, I think there are relatively few people out there who A, are still running 10.5 or 10.6, and B, want to jump to 10.12. But for those people, just be aware there's going to be an intermediate step or two.
Sounds like the best reason I've heard to just keep up with the upgrades. That means that your next upgrade path won't be as painful. Just, maybe not the first day, but,
Yeah, well, it's okay to wait. You're not going to... Honestly, Sierra is really, really, really similar to El Capitan. There are a few new features. There's Siri, which I think I've used once in Sierra. This is not the environment in which I typically would use Siri. There's the new security things. There's some other stuff, but I mean, it looks and acts really, really similar to El Capitan. I think most people won't even notice the difference most of the time. So I don't feel like you're going to be really, really missing out if you don't upgrade on day one. But I do think you should generally keep up with new software. I understand People who felt really burned with, the loss of Rosetta and Snow Leopard forever. I'm not one of those people. I understand there are some people like that, and I have a certain amount of sympathy for them. But on the whole, I think that we can only resist the march of technology for so long. And there are people who rode horses long after all their neighbors had cars. But sooner or later, you're probably not going to have a horse again. So,
or well, never mind. Stop.
Yeah.
Not going there. Not going there. How about the book? I'm going to get myself in real trouble here. How about the book specifics, Joe? As always,
I want to say this book is both shorter and cheaper than the one that we did last year. Take Control of Upgrading to El Capitan last year was, I think, 151 pages, and it was $15. And we kind of looked at this year, and we're like, all right, many of those pages existed to address kind of edge cases, like things that aren't going to affect very many people. And I wanted to be as comprehensive as I could and give all the details I could. But the feedback we were getting is like, you seriously expect me to read a 150-page book for what's going to turn out to be click the download button and click install? Seriously? We hear that, okay? And it's like I'm trying to solve the problems of people who are likely to get themselves into trouble, who are nervous, who find upgrading to be nerve-wracking and painful. But I also don't want it to feel intimidating, because really it's not that bad. Really, you're going to make a backup, you're going to run the installer, you're going to click some buttons, and I'm going to make sure you know which buttons to click and which buttons not to click. But that's kind of it. I will tell you what to do if you need to do some troubleshooting afterwards. But I didn't want people to feel like it's just this big, scary, oppressive process, because it isn't. So it's no longer 151 pages. It's now 99, and it's no longer $15. It's now $10. And I don't know that it will shrink even further in the future. But I cut out a whole bunch of stuff that just I felt like it could go, or we could, instead of putting it in the book, I can refer you to an article on the web or something like that, because it's just not going to be that big of a deal for that many people. And even those 100 pages, 99 pages, you don't have to read all of them. You're going to read some stuff at the beginning, and you're going to say, okay, well, this doesn't apply to me because I'm not upgrading from Snow Leopard, so I'll just go right past that chapter, and check. I have all those things, so I don't really need to read that in detail, and I'm going to skim this, and okay, this is the part I'm actually going to follow. So you really don't need to read 99 pages to successfully upgrade your Mac, but there are bound to be enough things in there that will get you out of trouble or prevent you from getting into trouble that I think it's worth $10.
And it's always easier to stay out of trouble first than to get out of trouble later. So $10 is a pretty cheap insurance policy, in my opinion.
And remember, you're no longer paying $129 for your Mac software. I mean, it used to be that Apple charged that to upgrade to a new version of OS X. So you've got all that money sitting around and wondering what you could possibly do with it. It's earmarked for upgrades, but no. So send it to me. That's fine. Well,
I said it at the outset, and I really mean it. There will inevitably be articles popping up on the web, here's how to get ready. And taking nothing away from those articles, but I seriously doubt there are many of them, if any, that have spent the time you have installing and uninstalling, finding out where the tricks and the pitfalls are. So that's why I said, I trust you to do it. I'm going to be following your instructions. Folks, I hope you will too.
Sounds good.
Okay. Joe, we'll see you back again here, because I know that I know the keys are burning up right now.
That's right. This is the season, and there are lots of things in the pipeline.
Great. Well, we'll be back to talk to you soon.
Great.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. Again, Take Control of Upgrading to Sierra by Joe Kissell at TakeControlBooks.com. Go get it. Be safe. Happy upgrading. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes, links to subscribe, and to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, SoundCloud, the MacVoices blog, the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter, and on MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard that helps you do more with your Apple tech. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.